Hi, today we're going to talk about William James, Principle of Psychology. This book, to be honest with you, is a monster. I looked it's in the Great Book set, it's a great book excerpt, and I looked at War and Peace to see how comparable it was. War and Peace is 700 pages in the Great Book set. This is 900. So, and everyone thought the War and Peace was the longest book ever written. So it's huge, but I just want to focus on the habit chapter because it is remarkable. Now, William James, you can check the author review, but he was the father of psychology, and he's from America. And it was amazing the insights he had. He actually had quite a depression when he was just a medical doctor, and fell into a depression until he found psychology or started to understand what it was, and then he found his life's work. So it's a fascinating story. Now in this habit chapter, he's so on. He just nails it. And listen what he says here. He says, "The hell to be endured hereafter, of which theology tells, is no worse than the hell we make for ourselves in this world by habitually fashioning our characters in the wrong way." I love that quote. If you've ever met an addict, someone that was truly addicted to something, you know what he's saying is absolutely true. The hell could be no worse in the afterlife than it is right now, today, in their life. And the more we fashion our character in the wrong way, the greater the hell we experience here. He talks then about the youth and how critically important it is that they understand, that they get this concept, this principle through their head so that they don't have to experience the hell here on earth. He says, "Could the young but realize how soon they will become mere walking bundles of habits, they would give more heed to their conduct while in this plastic state." And he means like a moldable state of being. "We are spinning our own fates, good or evil, and never to be undone. Every smallest stroke of virtue or of vice leaves its never so little scar." So people will say, it's just a little white lie, it's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. But it is. It makes that impression. And when I speak of impression, I got to go back to the beginning of the chapter where he talks about what happens when we're forming a habit. He says, "Organic matter, especially nervous tissue, seems endowed with a very extraordinary degree of plasticity of this sort, so that we may without hesitation lay down as our first proposition the following, that the phenomena of habit in living beings are due to the plasticity of the organic materials of which their bodies are composed." So meaning that our brains have are moldable, are like the potter's clay, right? And these impressions can be impressed on our minds, and they can form these channels. And he talks about it in the way of like a path through the forest. And the path that's never taken, well, there's really no path there. But if someone starts to cut their way through and make a path, that the more it's traversed, the more worn the path becomes, the deeper the path becomes, the wider it becomes, and the easier it is to cross. And he says the exact same thing happens in our brains. And that's why it's so critical that those paths that we're forming, those neurological paths, are in the right areas. It reminds me of a story I read. I can't remember where I read it. It was in a magazine or something, scientific magazine, about, or maybe it was a theology magazine. I can't remember. But the lady said that her husband had developed a one-track mind. He had just, from point A to point B, he was addicted to pornography. He'd been in it for 40 years. And she said that over time, he became stupider, less intelligent. He lost his intelligence over time to where he literally had that one-track mind. He'd gone over that trail or that track so many times, so often, and for so many years that it totally kind of like dissolved the rest of his brain. That's all he could. And so at the end of the story, she was saying that he can only do menial tasks. He can take the garbage out to the street. He was an accountant before. He couldn't keep his job because he couldn't think in the way he could think before. And so it's just fascinating to see James talk about this and the absolute importance that we emphasize, or that we understand and emphasize when we teach, how long-lasting our habits are and how deep it is. You think about someone that's in that created that channel for so long of the wrong habit of eating incorrectly, the wrong foods, or eating too much or whatever, and that's why so much effort's required, a tremendous amount of effort to undo a bad habit if it's deep-seated, because you have to get out of that channel. You have to create a new one, a new path in your brain, so to speak. I can't recommend it highly enough, and it's only about 20 pages in this book, or 30. It's very short, and it gives you a great taste of what William James was trying to accomplish and who he was. He does give some recommendations that I wanted to go over real quick, and the first one he says, this is to create a new habit. He says, the first is that in the acquisition of a new habit or the leaving off of an old one, we must take care to launch ourselves. Now, he uses the word launch. You think of launching like you're launching a rocket, because it's going to take a lot of energy. But we want to launch ourselves with as strong and decided an initiative as possible. So you're going to do it. You have decided, and we know, you may know, decide is to cut off. So you've cut off your other options. You're going to do it no matter what. The second maxim is, never suffer an exception to occur till the new habit is securely rooted in your life. So if you decide you want to be healthy, and you always eat way too much dessert. Let's say you eat 3 or 4 times too much dessert. So you say, I'm not going to eat any more dessert. Now, until the new habit has taken place, you can't give in. You can't go ahead and just have tons and tons of dessert, because if you do, you're breaking this second principle that he's stating here. The third is, seize the very first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make and on every emotional prompting you may experience in the direction of the habits you aspire to gain. That is so awesome. Let me read it again. There's 2 parts to it. Seize the very first possible opportunity to act on your resolution, and then on every emotional prompting you may experience in the direction of the habit. So say you decide that you're going to start reading, and you should be reading better books. And so you have an opportunity. That first opportunity, instead of going and watching the TV like you normally do or whatever you do, you're going to grab the book and you're going to read. And then he says you might have some insights. Your conscience, your intuition might tell you that you should do something. And he says act upon those when they tell you. And the acting, he says, is critical. And he says this is so fascinating. He says here, and it's all about acting. You got to do something. You have to do. You just can't. If you don't do, you're just wishing. And he says this: there is no more contemptible type of human character than that of the nerveless sentimentalist and dreamer, who spends his life in a weltering sea of sensibility and emotion, but who never does a manly, concrete deed. Isn't that awesome? We've got to be men and women, and we've got to do what's required. We have to act. Now, listen to this example he follows up with. Rousseau, inflaming all the mothers of France by his eloquence, to follow nature and nurse their babies themselves, while he sends his own children to the family hospital, is a classic example of what I mean. And he means what he means not to do. Now, I agree with Rousseau. I think nursing is great, but he was the ultimate hypocrite. He wouldn't do what he was telling people to do. And so we have to act. We have to decide what the new habits we want, or what habits we want to get rid of, and obviously we've got to replace it with the new one, and then we've got to act. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's the Habit chapter out of the Principles of Psychology from William James. Enjoy. We'll talk to you soon.